If you're watching this channel, it's because you don't enjoy watching the world squander what Christendom built, but you want to do your part. And chances are you've heard me mention a great means by doing just that. Email made by and for Catholics. Check out fidei.email. That's FIDEI.email. Built for Catholic individuals, families, organizations, and groups. They're private, secure, and of course, they're Catholic. And they're offering 2 months off on your first year for an annual subscription if you enter the coupon code Return2Tradition without spaces. That's the name of this channel, without spaces, at checkout. From time to time, it is necessary for us to step outside of the news of the church and look to the broader culture. It's easy to forget how bad things actually are out there. There are some choice words we could use to describe the state of the culture. Depraved is one word. Evil, diabolical, satanic, demonic. The list goes on and on and on. But none of them really fail to capture things in the spirit of things than just calmly describing what's going on. See, there are figures out there watching the development of the spread of this anti-human movement in the world. I don't mean, stuff like when Elon Musk suggests people hooking computer chips into their bodies and things. I'm not talking stuff like that. That is certainly important to keep an eye on, of course, for obvious reasons, but there's an underlying thing going on right now, and it doesn't get much traction in the media, even in Catholic media. And so the story came across my desk a couple of days ago. I couldn't really believe it until I thought about it for a couple of seconds and said, yeah, that tracks. So we're going to talk about this now. In the past 30 years, we've become kind of numb to this spreading of devaluing of existence. We see this underlying all the rhetoric about care for our common home, as Pope Francis would call it. We see this in the standard secular discourse now. About 30 years ago, my former state of Oregon was the trailblazing state in the country. It was the first to pass a law that allowed medical professionals to help people, or assist them, you might say. Allow them to remove themselves from this mortal coil, as long as they met certain criteria. It shocked the country when that was passed by voters on a standard ballot back in the mid-1990s at some point. But then it spread across the country. Not every state has these laws, obviously, in the United States, but a fair number of them do. And Europe was also starting to pass these laws at the same time as well. And the story's not so much about the United States, although you can expect what you're about to see in this story happen in a state near you. And it became part of the normal landscape depending where you are in some parts of the country. And when it got to Canada, we started hearing horror stories about how this was being used, especially in the last few years. So let's get to the main part of the story so we can understand what's going on. Headline from The People's Voice. Switzerland to offer $20 self-destruction pod expiration to citizens who can't afford basic necessities. Yes, Switzerland has decided that social programs are not necessarily the way to help the poorest members of their country. Instead, they decided that offering them the ability to remove themselves from this mortal coil was a better option if they so wanted it. Personal choice is key to understanding this. One wonders how long this will be voluntary for, though. The pods they use will be portable, meaning state officials and subcontractors, and always be subcontractors, honestly, for the state will be able to go around to poor neighborhoods to provide their diabolical service, at a cost of about $20 per use to the state. So those who have lost absolute touch with humanity and only care about fiscal responsibility will be quite pleased with this offering. After all, $20 use to the state per use is much cheaper than offering someone state assistance. And no, I'm not necessarily endorsing state assistance programs. They have their own policy problems, mountains of them. But compared to this, they're angelic. And the way that these things work, though, is inside the pod, the oxygen is eventually replaced with nitrogen, which then causes the person to fall asleep and, well, they don't wake up, as you'll see. So from this article, quote, the portable self-destruction pod will be used for the first time in Switzerland, allowing people with various ailments, afflictions of the mind, and social problems to remove themselves from the equation for just $20. The Last Resort organization said it saw no legal obstacle to its use in Switzerland, where the law generally allows this practice if the person goes through with it and completes it themselves. Since we have people indeed queuing up asking to use the device, it is very likely that it'll take place pretty soon. The Last Resort's chief executive, Florian Willet, told a press conference, "I cannot imagine a more beautiful way to meet your maker, of breathing air without oxygen into falling to eternal sleep," he added. The person wishing to go away must first pass a psychiatric assessment of their mental capacity, a key legal requirement. The person climbs in the purple capsule, closes the lid, and is asked automated questions such as who they are, where they are, and if they know what happens when they press the button. "If you want to finish it," the voice says in the processor, "press this button," said Sarco inventor Philip Nietzsche, a leading worldwide figure in the activism on this issue. He explained that once the button is pressed, the amount of oxygen in the air plummets from 21% to 0.05% in less than 30 seconds. Within 2 breaths of air of that low level of oxygen, they will start to feel disoriented, uncoordinated, and slightly euphoric before passing out, Nietzsche says. They will then stay in that state of unconsciousness for about 5 minutes before the whole process comes to its end, he added. The device monitors the oxygen level in the capsule, the person's heart rate, and the oxygen saturation of the blood. We will be able to see quickly when that person has finished, said Nietzsche. As for someone changing their mind at the very last minute, he said, "Once you press that button, there's no way of going back." And mostly, quote. Okay. I want to point out that this person's name is suspiciously close to Nietzsche. And so if you want to know what a nihilistic worldview looks like when taken to its logical conclusion, or maybe next to its logical conclusion, maybe 1 or 2 steps away, this person here is a pretty good example of that. And there are people who will defend this, saying, well, if people are suffering, you should give them an opportunity. We know the talking points. We, for the last 30 years, have lived in this culture where this practice has been argued for vociferously by those who defend it. So we're used to the talking points. But there's more to it than that, because this isn't just people who are facing some unresolvable affliction that is going to make them go through horrible experiences before they finally are done with it. No, this is being offered to people with relatively mild issues as well. So don't worry, this is coming to an American state and Western European country near you soon enough. The culture is in such a place where it's inevitable. Many Christians will want to blame this on our passing laws, allowing the more rudimentary versions of this beginning in the 1990s, where medical professionals were allowed to help people in removing themselves from this mortal coil due to those sort of permanent afflictions that are extremely painful to deal with before those afflictions finally remove themselves. And of course, to a degree, they're right, but as usual, anyone blaming that for this is missing the point entirely. I place the blame for this squarely on Christians, who allowed for this to happen in embracing lukewarm, liberalizing forces in the church, refusing to spread the gospel, and not fighting against the forces of evil in the cultural and political realm. We just sort of sat back starting in the 1960s when mysteriously in the Catholic Church, all of a sudden we went from being pretty hardline on our morality, our stance in the world, to flirting with evils morally ourselves in the church, and the church no longer stepping forward and saying no. And on the rare occasion when the church did step forward and say no, due to our own internal problems, allowed by our own lukewarmness and the infiltration in the church, suddenly we lost all of our moral cachet. Look at for example, the timing of the Ted McCarrick problem when it became public in 2003, when it was actually known already for almost a decade that the church had a serious problem with this, but the media didn't go after the Catholic Church until 2003. And if you know about the timing of that at all, then you understand that it was used essentially as a sort of metaphorical cudgel to keep the church out of geopolitical questions going on at the time. But even then, many Catholics embraced the party of Moloch. told ourselves that their endorsement of that evil procedure was no big deal and a matter of personal choice, and then supported them for decades, although that support seems to be waning. That same party in the U.S. was behind making this evil practice of medical professionals helping people remove themselves from the equation legal, and it spread as this practice. We saw this practice expand greatly, where in Canada has been recommended as a means of dealing with physical disabilities. Find being in a wheelchair inconvenient? Well, boy, do we have an option for you. If you hadn't heard that story, back in February it broke in the international news, where this incredible account happened. Quote, in one instance, a Canadian Forces veteran claimed she had been offered the service to remove herself from this mortal coil in response to a request for a wheelchair lift or ramp at her house. While a subsequent investigation found no record that this practice was offered, Veterans Affairs discovered 4 cases in which the service had been inappropriately suggested. The case manager was suspended and the incident was referred to the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. In another case, the family of Alan Nichols said he expired by this assistance with hearing loss listed as the sole criterion. The family reported it to police and health authorities, but neither saw cause to investigate further. The Royal Canadian Mounted Police told the family that Nichols, quote, met the criteria for the practice. But physicians who provide the service caution that anecdotes of Canadians slipping through the cracks often ignore other critical details of their respective cases, which must include a, quote, grievous and irremediable medical condition, and do not necessarily suggest a failure in the system, end quote. In other words, the system is working as it should according to the medical professionals involved. And yes, the numbers are increasing every single year in Canada, and the same is almost certainly true in Switzerland, which is why Swiss authorities are offering mobile services to meet increasing demands. And if it's increasing there, you know that it's increasing in Oregon. I know, I saw those numbers recently, that they're increasing in Oregon and other places in the country. Why is that? Because Christians stopped spreading the gospel. We stopped resisting the party of Moloch to the point where now the other party has decided to sort of join them in sort of a watered-down version of trying to be the party of Moloch. I suspect that's temporary, though. I really do, because the backlash they're getting for it could cost them severely if they don't actually at least pay lip service to the issues we have with their position. Of course, the thing about it is, as I said in my live stream on this a couple weeks ago, the GOP turning their back on the anti-Moloch movement, they're just being more honest now, because that's actually what they've always done for 30 years. They've always done that. They're just not lying about it anymore. And as Christians, we need to do something about this. And we can't just surrender the culture to them by letting the party of Moloch run rampant and pass these evils nationwide, which they've promised to do if they get power. So we're stuck between a rock and a hard place. But how do we combat this spread of that practice in Switzerland and Canada? They're making it as easy as possible to get because they've lost the sense of decency. Maybe they haven't had it in a very, very long time, for virtually all of our lives. I'm curious, what do you think we can do to stop this? My remedy is spreading the gospel, which is the hardest remedy of all. Because while we've become kind of lukewarm in our relationships with the rest of the world, guess what's happened? They've become hostile to what they think the gospel is. We have allowed our adversaries, forces of Satan in the culture, to define what the gospel is. And now, because of the power of mass media, our adversaries think the gospel is something evil. That's what they think. That's why we have such a difficulty now when those of us who try to spread the gospel do try. I'm curious, though, what you think about this story. Are you surprised this practice is spreading? Do you expect to see the Swiss version of it coming to a place near you soon? Let me know in the comments, please. Hit like and subscribe if you haven't. It certainly helps. So does sharing this on social media. That helps a lot, too. And as always, pray for the church. I'm Anthony Stine. Ave Maria.